Hello? Welcome home. So tired. I'm pretty tired, but not for like, not because I've been working hard, I guess. I've been, I didn't like, I couldn't sleep last night, so very, very insomnia filled, week. But I couldn't sleep last night, so I like did my morning meetings today, and then I just went to bed afterward. So I didn't really get much done today. But I'm also tired, which I feel like is kind of unfair because I didn't have a normal day. But it's okay. It happens. It happens. Otherwise, things good. Stuff is good. Stuff are okay. Yeah, some days are like that. Okay, let's do a little bit of free drawing before we get started. And then we'll start doing calm stuff. Learned how to bulk upload videos? Nice. Yeah, I hope not too much of a strain. You live with people, right? Okay. I'm pretty frustrated with my lack of understanding with arm muscles. So I was doing some note taking. I mean, I do it, I just don't show people. Hey Creative, hey Prodigy, hey Ophi, hey Samia, hey Sullivan. Welcome, welcome. Hey Mono, hey Moody. How have you guys been? Hey Ominous, hey Cinnamon, how's my week? My week was pretty okay. I pretty close to wrapping up a pretty big contract that I've been doing for a while. So I'm gonna tie up all the loose ends on that next week, and then if that all goes well, then I will be on a break from work stuff, like actual like NDA stuff, for like the next 3 weeks of September, which is gonna be pretty crazy. So I'm hoping that everything goes well, and with that, and then I can just find something else to fill my time with, because taking a break is a weird concept. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to fully do that, but everything goes well, and I end up making sure that like everything goes through and we're all fine on that front. Then there is a plan to potentially stream a lot more in the month of September than I have been for a while, because it's the first time I've actually had not a job for a little bit, because I'm in between. So it's sort of like a soft announcement, because I think it's gonna happen as long as everything goes according to plan. But there is a plan to maybe shoot for completing all of the requirements to accomplish the partner achievement, which is a part of the Twitch like achievement stat things. And that means that if I apply to become a partner, a Twitch partner, my application kind of goes through in like a sort of faster circuit. So that requires me to stream a lot more often. And that will probably come out, like, result in me streaming Monday, Wednesday, Fridays instead of just on Fridays. It's a bit of a weird month to start doing that, because I know a lot of people are like going back to school and stuff, but that's possible. They're not gonna probably be like super long streams. I'm mainly gonna be trying to finish the rest of our charity commissions, maybe do some other stuff in that time. But yeah, so that's the tentative plan for me to start streaming 3 times a week instead of just once. At least for the next 3 weeks in September. After that, I don't know if I can keep that up, because I'll be going back to a just normal 9 to 5 day job schedule. But before then, while I am on break, we might be able to do that for a little bit. So I'll let you guys know more officially, potentially on the first stream that I do next week, which might be on the Monday. And we might have more of that figured out. But yeah, just want to let you guys know that might be something that happens. But yeah, hi Breno. Hi Gabby. Hi Jay. Yeah, lots of things going on. Savage raids? Hey, I need to I don't know. I feel like I don't even have like the beginner skill set to even try to do Savage. Yeah, I do want the new armor. That's true. Steven, thank you for the Twitch Prime sub for 22 months. I figure they're not like the worst, but it would just require a group that like everyone else knows what they're doing except for me. That's a tall order. No. Aw, thank you, Drogo. Welcome back. Glad you could make it. Hey, Luna. Some of these commissions are posted to the Discord. Otherwise, I don't really post them anywhere else. How are things? How are you settled in after moving? Things have been okay. Our dryer broke the other day, and so we've been having all laundry piled up, and I had to go through like this whole thing with like contacting like the whole like learning how to use like the maintenance system, requesting system for like the new place, and there was a lot of like weird stuff with that, like login credentials that I didn't have, and like not having the right codes for things to be able to register for myself, and not getting the email to reset the password, even though I checked my spam and all that kind of stuff. It was a big thing. We finally managed to get someone to come in, and they fixed it so fast. They fixed it in like 20 minutes, which was excellent. So other than that, though, things have been pretty okay. It definitely been interesting adjusting to the fact that I'm like an LA person now. Oh, by the way, if you don't know, moved to LA. It's very different from where I used to live. It's actually not super loud because I live pretty far away from like a lot of the main like city downtown areas. Where I live is actually pretty quiet, except for there like are a lot of dog owners around here, and as soon as one of their dogs starts barking, every dog on the road that lives like close or on the road starts barking. So like without fail, every single day around like 2, we get the cacophony, the orchestra that insists on making itself known. Also, funny new thing that happened today. There was a stray cat, or at least a cat that we don't know like who it belongs to. We found a cat that was just like in our little backyard area, and it was giving Peach some major like just like gaslight gatekeep girl bossing her all the way, which I thought was so funny. Peach was caterwauling for the first time, which was not something that she's ever done. I was asleep, so I wasn't really like awake for it, but my partner was trying to like get her to calm down. It was just so funny. I love when Peach interacts with other cats because she's just so hopeless. It's so funny. Caterwauling, it's when they do that like super low yowling, and it's usually when they're up against other cats, predator animals. Do you visualize hair as ribbons when you draw? I heard a lot of people say that's the easiest way to imagine drawing hair, and I really love how delicate it looks. Yeah, I very much operate by the whole like hair is like paper or cloth or whatnot. I think depending on the kind of mood I am, it changes the look a little bit, but yeah, I'd say that is probably pretty close to how I envision it. Hi, Candy. Aw, seems like you had a really good time on the set. Did I get a standing desk to work? Yes, I did get a standing desk, and it's actually been quite nice. I do need some kind of mat, because a lot of my weight rests on my heels, and the carpet that I stand on is not super like plush, so I end up having really stiff like knees and kind of like the bottom of my feet really is sore after a while. But I do actually really enjoy standing, especially when I'm not drawing and I'm just kind of like watching a YouTube video or like researching stuff. It's nice to kind of just like be able to sort of move a little bit and walk around. I do worry about how strong my standing desk will be because I had to mod an IKEA desk to make it work, but so far it's been pretty nice. It is definitely a hassle though with having like a desktop computer because everything has to be able to move with the desk, and if your cables are not long enough, like that's an issue. Luckily mine is. All of my cables are just long enough to reach where my tower is currently standing, but I'm probably gonna move it, like get a like little, what is it? Its own little stand underneath the desk so that it can be a little bit more clean, because cable management doesn't really work for me right now. Are you currently working for some studio? You know, I don't know if I can say. I did just complete a contract that was pretty big for me, and I'm about to start a new job at a studio. I could probably talk about my new job after like being there for a week, just so that I'm like, okay, so this wasn't like a fever dream. You guys actually hired me. I'm not like, you know, just like pretending that like I did the whole interview process and you guys gave, like, I know you guys gave me the offer letter. I know I went through the whole interview process and we talked about the fact that I'm gonna work there, but in my head I'm still like, I don't know if this is actually happening still. So I'm gonna wait till like been there for a little bit before I like tell people. And I'm also kind of like, I don't know, I'm a little nervous about telling people where I work, just because it's like I keep work stuff very separate from online stuff, even though part of my identity, I guess now working in games is partially what studio do I work for. So I'm a little nervous about telling people. I will tell you what I was doing before. On Friday. I'll tell you what I've just completed. As long as the contract stuff works out and like ends, smoothly, I will let you know next Friday what I've been doing for the past like 6 months. Hi Paige, how are you? How's art test hell? Yeah. I can't necessarily say what I worked on specifically, but I can tell you where I've been doing, like where I've been working, what I've been doing, sort of like what all of the secrecy has been about, because I couldn't talk about it mainly because the product itself hadn't been announced or even teased. It's a little bit safer now, but yeah. Do you get nervous thinking about employers watching the stream? Yeah, mainly because I definitely got my last job because one of the people who watched my stream worked at the company. So yeah. Hellacious. I understand. Thank you, Unicorn. What was the last job you can talk about? My last full-time job that I did was working at a kind of startup. I left back in January. But like I can talk about that as in I've worked there, but it's also kind of like it doesn't exist anymore. So it's kind of like, do you guys actually want to hear about it? When you work on a character design, how do you come up with a unique idea? Mine usually seem to be a bit generic or something that I can see has been done before. Also, how do concept artists come up with so many different iterations? Is they say in the hundreds? Is that true? People trying to scare me for a concept given to them by a client. I can only come with 3 to 5 for a concept, and they look pretty much all the same with a little difference. Yeah, so I'd say the importance of this kind of changes and you'll get better at this as you do more. The importance of having a hook with a character design changes depending on the project, but it's always good to kind of start with a hook. And what I mean with a hook is like similar to how in maybe English class or writing class they might tell you like, you know, start a sentence with something you really know will like give your reader both an idea of what the sentence is about or what the paragraph is about, while also creating like an interesting like question or pull in so that they kind of stay around. For a lot of character designs that can manifest in different ways, right? Did my music stop? No, we're good. The most classic example is like character with a big weapon, right? Small character, big weapon is a very classic hook structure. Whatever the big weapon is will change, but it is definitely like a way that people pull someone into just like the base idea of a character. Another hook could be style, right? So clearly super hyper gothic, like kind of grittier dark styles is also a hook. That's an aesthetic hook, right? So when it comes to creating non-generic characters, I'd say don't necessarily worry about making something that's never been done before or is totally new, but rather is, in your opinion, an interesting twist on the generic concept, right? Easiest way a lot of people do this is usually by mixing together multiple things. So that's why a lot of like beginner concept prompts are like this, but set in this time period, or imagine this thing, but mixed with this, right? It's I don't know. It's like what's an example? What are my projects? What are the hooks of my projects? It's I think I said, what was my elevator pitch for my racer project? well, I guess not even like that structure, but my basic premise for my roller derby girl Horangi was like, she is a roller derby athlete who moonlights in a kind of street gang, right? She moonlights as this speed racer. And her hook, her visual hook, right? That's her like idea hook. Her visual hook are her giant robotic legs. The twist of it being a roller derby athlete, but having these like giant robot legs. That's kind of the twist on the idea of what she was, which is still holistically a roller derby athlete. And I'd say you don't have to do much to make an idea not super generic. Don't worry about making things unique or totally original, right? It's never usually the ideas that are super original that are interesting. It's usually when someone gives you an interesting twist to something you have already seen before that's like, oh, that's cool. Like, that's a new way of interpreting the same idea, right? And frankly, all things are sort of rehashed together. Some artists, it's really easy to see like what their inspirations were, while other people are a lot better at mixing multiple interests, multiple things that make them as an artist really unique in terms of taste and in terms of their upbringing, that when it comes out, it looks really unique and different, but that's because they put it through so many filters. They've really curated like what went into that kind of pot to create that, you know, kind of dish of what, if we were gonna equate art to food. And so, you know, that's talking about being like your designs being generic, right? When we're talking about iterations, cumulatively, hundreds is not uncommon, but it is also not something that you're expected to do kind of natively, right? I'd say people see hundreds kind of as a scare tactic, right? I feel like a lot of concept people, they like to kind of fluff up their numbers a little bit because it's like, oh yeah, I've done hundreds of sketches. But like, frankly, we usually do maybe anywhere between like 20 to upwards of 50, again, cumulatively. This is like over the whole course of a character's design. You do as many sketches as you need to get that character to a place that's that fits the project, that works with the parameters that you need. It's not about how many sketches you do, it's what do those sketches accomplish, right? And so if you needed 100 sketches to get somewhere, then you needed those 100 sketches. But if you can get there faster in 5, in 10, in 20, no one's going to prefer that you did 100, right? So that's kind of like the idea. You never want to do more sketches than you have to. It takes time, it takes energy, it takes brain power. That's why being a concept artist is partially also curating your designs as you're making them without preventing or like without stopping yourself from trying new ideas even if they're not fully formed. So I'd say yes, it's kind of like they're trying to scare you. It's not necessarily inaccurate, but just not overall like totally true. I'd say in general, when I've been asked to do sketches for characters, I might do upwards of 20-ish sketches total before we hit a direction that they're like, okay, we don't need that many sketches anymore, do 3 to 5 per round of different variations of this character, right? And that's an important thing. When you're talking about variations, iterations of a character, you're trying to basically take a fresh look at what is essentially the basic building blocks of a character's like idea. So there are a lot of different ways all the time that you can interpret any given character prompt if you boil it down enough, right? So, like, if we're going to take a very basic, like, fairy tale concept, like, in Beauty and the Beast sometimes is described as being very, like, think hulking, furry. The idea that he's a werewolf is, or werewolf-like, as Disney kind of did it, is an interpretation of the Beast. And you can say that, oh, you know, the original fairy tale had, like, a bunch of descriptors for him. But if you were like going to really think about what is the context of like what the beast mean in this story, there's no reason for him to have to be like canine adjacent, or even like, you know, like a lion or whatever. There's no reason for him to look the way he does. He doesn't have to be this like furry creature. He could be anything, because what he accomplishes is not due to the fact that he's like a fur covered lion werewolf thing, but more so that he's supposed to represent kind of this physical visual manifestation of just like kind of self-loathing, of this kind of overt ugliness of character. Like, that's kind of the, you know, whole premise of him. But people get really tied up in what they think a character should be, and that will sometimes stop them from trying out designs that maybe aren't what they originally thought characters should look like. And this is especially true for characters that we personally own, right? Your OCs and stuff like that. I'm guilty of this too. The first image I have of a character is usually the last. And I don't usually in my free time like try to iterate on my own characters, because it's like, I don't really care. Like, you know, I thought this character looked cute in my head, I'm just gonna draw them. And that's that. But when you're doing a concept job, you want to be giving every idea an opportunity to exist, to be put out there on the table, so that, especially when you're not the one making the final call, the person who's actually, you know, in charge of the product or whatever, is given the opportunity to also be involved in the process of choosing the direction and the look of the character. Especially because you never know if your idea of them is accurate, right? So, I'd say really start to broaden your understanding of what it means for a character to quote-unquote look a certain way. If you feel as if your iterations have really been stuck looking very similar with very small changes, it's probably because you put yourself in a bit of a pigeonhole as to what you think should be on this character, what this character should wear, right? Just because this character is stealthy or, you know, has this kind of like roguish edge to them, it doesn't mean they have to look like Assassin's Creed, and it doesn't mean they have to wear tech wear if you're doing like a sci-fi thing, right? There's a lot of different ways that you can be stealthy. They don't even have to be wearing like athleisure looking stuff. But that's like a preconceived notion of what it means to be quote unquote a certain hook or a certain idea. And the sooner that you allow yourself to escape those ideas, the easier it will be for you to try new potential directions for something, even if it's not like the most obvious or the most logical choice, right? I'd say always giving those ideas a chance might end up bringing you to a place that you haven't been before, and giving you an opportunity to really try, like, okay, well, I haven't had the opportunity to do a character that has like a certain type of silhouette and stuff. Any idea you can kind of pull into and kind of forge into the shape of like fitting a character concept. You just kind of have to be smart about it. So my recommendation when it comes to that stuff is often return to your reference or start building a new reference board. If your reference board predominantly reinforces the same idea, then you built that reference board with an already existing bias. The idea of a reference board, the idea of an inspiration board, is never to box you into a pre-existing idea of what something should be. It's supposed to be an open well for you to dump as many different potential ideas as possible, so that when you need that little extra like adrenaline rush of like that little boost of ideas, you're not stuck to things that have already kind of supported the sketches that you've already come up with, right? You don't want an echo chamber where the only ideas going into your like brain and into your visual library are things you would have already done in the first place. And so that's why whenever I talk about doing reference boards, I tell people that they should put in objects. They should put in things unrelated to their character's concept or the character's idea that is like super obvious, because then when you're just looking at stuff for the sake of color or the sake of shape or the sake of like, you know, just like kind of the coolness factor of it, it matches the vibe, right? It passes the vibe check or something like that, which is super abstract, but you just somehow feel like it fits. Those are the things that you should really be looking at to kind of push yourself away from the super generic, like everything kind of looks the same, every iteration looks the same. That's why some people start with silhouettes, because silhouettes are really hard for you to define, like, this is what a character is wearing, this is what they do, or this is how they wear it. You are forced to look at something based on a very abstract idea and judge things based on a very abstract parameter, which is shape design. Very hard to tell, like, is that a good shape or is that a bad shape? You don't really know. It really puts you in a different space, right? And so that's why people say start with silhouettes. But you don't have to. It's just, that's the idea behind it, right? I'd say the more you're willing to allow yourself the potential to fail by trying out ideas that you might have discounted before, or even just endeavoring to throw something random into the mix just for fun, right? All of those things are opportunities for you to kind of play test new directions, new kind of spectrums of thinking about what should this character be. Because ultimately what we're trying to figure out is who can this character be, not who they should be, right? We don't know the end result, but we're building the tracks around who they can be. We're building that sandbox, and then we're playing within it. Any way that you can keep yourself from defining that too soon, too early, will help you when you notice that it's becoming really generic, it's not interesting enough. Like, all of those things are easily remedied when you've given yourself enough of a head start towards building a visual library, building a reference or inspiration board that isn't already going to reestablish and affirm your pre-existing ideas of, like, again, what this character should look like. That's not the point of concept or character design. But again, all this stuff changes depending on if that's what matters to you. It seems like it does in this context, but, you know, some people are like when I make normal characters, I'm just like, oh, you know, I'll just draw this character and that's who they look like, and that's it. But when it comes to actually, like, doing portfolio work, doing, like, actual professional work, would definitely recommend noticing where you've kind of predetermined what this character should look like. Hey Artifa. How did your large following help your career? I'd say the biggest thing that it did was kind of do a lot of passive advertisement for me. Because overall, I have not really had to do the classic, like, hard apply to places, because generally I've sort of staggered through work that I've gotten very slowly over the years, and having an online kind of footprint meant that in the time that I'm busy and not taking any extra work, I could be potentially earning new work. You know, there's always a possibility that some recruiter is looking at your portfolio or even just looking at your work on Instagram and they're like, hey, this looks pretty cool. Or even a team member for a project is like, hey, I would really love to work with this person. Let's, like, try to contact them. You never know when that's happening. And I think that's one of the biggest benefits of, like, having an online platform is, like, you can put yourself in that position without actually having to literally physically put yourself in a position to get your stuff looked at through like a job portal and whatnot. So I'd say that's like probably the biggest thing. What do you do after making silhouettes? So the idea with silhouettes is that you're trying to come up with interesting, eye-catching shapes, right? To kind of move on from that is sort of where the using silhouettes as the starting point has always fallen apart for me personally, because from that you have to start defining what do those silhouette shapes mean. And unfortunately, when you're just thinking in like silhouette shapes and in that kind of like very abstract outer limit of a character, right? You're not necessarily thinking about like, oh, when I make this like hard edge on this side, like what does that mean? Is that like the edge of a jacket or whatever? And you realize, you know, you might have been putting shapes in places that definitely like didn't make sense to have a shape there. Now you have to come up with a reason for it to be there. So there comes a problem of people feeling tied a little bit too much to the silhouette that they made, or when they try to redraw a design that they made through a silhouette, it looks completely different, right? The shapes are different because they weren't thinking about, you know, oh, like what's the inside seam of his jacket gonna look like when they were designing kind of this big outer layer. And now that they're posed differently or whatever, all the shapes are different. Everything feels like maybe a lot less interesting. It's a lot less dynamic because ultimately the idea behind it wasn't necessarily that dynamic to begin with. So what comes after silhouettes is often defining the details of your design. But I would say this is where a lot of silhouette practices fall apart, which is why I don't do them. And to the best of your ability, if you can try to maintain the integrity of the design, why you chose that design in the first place, right? Why you chose that silhouette in the first place, while also coming up with reasonable explanations for why certain shapes are the way they are, why the silhouette looks this way, and not like losing that kind of dynamic kind of interest or even like life that the silhouette might have had. Anything you can do to make that happen, Godspeed. That's probably the goal. But yeah, it's basically coming up with now explanations for like why does it look the way it does. Which I've always hated doing after silhouettes. And I just started sketching instead, because I don't think in shapes. As far as working on ideas outside your comfort zone, yeah, random generators are sometimes fun. I know a lot of character challenges deal with prompt-based stuff. You think reference packs are a good investment? I'd say some of them are, some of them aren't. Reference packs are good if you actually use them. I often do not. I've purchased some in the past, and I just kind of forget that I have them downloaded, and then it's like, oh, well, that's alright, I guess. But I'd say, you know, generally, like, yeah, they're as good as any other, like, reference material, often sometimes more specific and a lot more, useful to your specific case if that's something that you can find, but, I generally, like, if I need something very specific, I'll either try to do it myself or I'll just try to combine a bunch of different references to make something. I have very rarely found like an explicit need for a reference pack beyond being like, oh, cool. Like they released like a bunch of well lit, well photographed like poses for figure drawing, costume figure drawing. So yeah, like yeah, I might buy that pack. But I will say I have bought many packs and I've never used any of them because I always forget that I purchased them. So that's cool. I'll have to let Gary know. I do own his sketches book that he released a long time ago. The one with the green and red cover. Hey, Siren. Any tips for art block and lack of motivation to draw? So I've kind of always viewed art block as a kind of subconscious manifestation of like my brain telling me I'm bored of the stuff that we do. I'm bored of the stuff that we know how to do. But I'm too scared to want to learn new stuff, right? The idea that like you don't necessarily want to be pushing yourself out of your comfort zone. You just kind of don't want, but you still don't want to like draw at all. To me, it usually indicates just like a level of like I'm comfortable sort of with what I can do. My eye hasn't developed to a point where I find anything wrong with it, and I am now out of like ideas that are exciting or new or even just like you know interesting to try to work on. So usually in times of art block and or lack of motivation, I try to kind of rework the people that I'm looking at, right? So I predominantly only follow artists. I don't follow like literally anyone else. So I take a good look at like all the people I've been looking at in the past couple days or weeks, and I really try to figure out like who are the artists that are really making difference for me, right? Like when I look at their art, they make me excited to draw. And that is like those are the people that you should really be paying attention to, because that usually means that what they're doing is something that is kind of triggering a part of your brain. And there's something to be learned from that, something to be learned from art that makes you excited when you yourself are not excited to draw. So I tend to really go back and like start to look at some work, some artists that I've fallen out of love with, or I'll even try to find new artists. Like recently, I discovered some sites which have high quality image of public domain classical art from a bunch of different art movements. And I've been looking at a lot of just like oil paintings, which is definitely not what I do, right? I don't do oil paintings. I don't do anything close to like realism or even like Rococo romantic. But there's something just so like beautiful and soothing about like looking at art that really kind of pushed that boundary, as well as academic art that are just like top of their class level of like total understanding of like reality of how form and three-dimensional form and 2D spaces work. And it's just like, you know, it's just beautiful in every way. It's my type of like art that I love to look at. So I looked at a bunch of that stuff, and that kind of got me really excited about, okay, like I really want to work on my structure. I really want to work on like drawing characters in a bunch of different poses. I want to draw more candid poses of my characters and draw them doing things so I can work my way up to maybe like bigger illustrations and whatnot. And it's moments like that where I'm taking the time to really reconnect with art in a way that's separate from me making it, right? I'm reconnecting with art in a way that's all about what I am excited about. It's all about what I'm looking forward to, all these artists that are doing things that I haven't done yet or can't do yet, and I'm excited about all the ideas that they are kind of putting forward, that it then makes me feel like, oh, well, now I really want to draw. Like, now I really want to do all this stuff. And it's not immediate, right? It usually takes like a little bit. I generally try to give myself like a few days to sort of just be like, okay, I'm gonna do less art around this time and I'm gonna take a break, but I am going to still be looking at art and I'm still gonna be consuming it because that's like the only thing that I do with my life. Usually I find that when I lack motivation, it's because I am bored with the things that I am capable of doing, and I want to be consuming things that will push me towards something new and interesting, potentially change my mind about art, or even just give me like a fresh new perspective on like the art that's being put out into the world. Because when you're just looking at stuff on like Instagram, the same people that post all the time, like your world starts getting smaller. You start thinking like, oh, these are the only artists that are like uploading right now. This is what art looks like. Art's huge. The sphere of artists is really big, and if you even just took the time to find like a new artist, you'll find totally different styles and different ideas that are being put out there. And it's fascinating. It's like endlessly updating itself, and all these new artists are coming in and leaving and kind of refreshing the sphere. So I personally have always found that when I lack motivation, it's kind of that taking a moment to really reconnect with art and fall in love with it again that helps me get through that period of like, I don't know what to draw. But it's also important to ask yourself, like, are you feeling this way because there's actually something you secretly do want to draw, but you're a little too afraid to do it because you feel like you're not ready, right? This like itch in you that's like, I really kind of want to try something, but I'm a little too nervous that it's not gonna work out or it's gonna fail, and then you're like, okay, well, I should just draw stuff that I know how to do because like then it'll like look fine, right? At least I know how to do this stuff. But then you sit down and you start to draw and you're like, I don't really want to do this, you know? I want to try that project I wanted to do a while back. I want to do that webtoon, or I want to like draw this like, you know, illustration. I want to try painting, but the fear of it kind of stops you, and then you're like, maybe I just have art block, maybe it's that. But it could also just be that you're stopping yourself from trying things that you could genuinely be interested in doing. You already know what you want to do, you just are unwilling to take the risk to try it. All of those things are possible, right? I'm not going to say that this is exactly what's happening for you, but I'd say it's worth examining kind of the nuances of what you're feeling, right? Because you could just be exhausted. You could just be tired, and you've maybe been doing a lot of stuff recently, and it's been putting you in kind of a state of survival, and now that you're out of it, you're just tired, and that's fine. You can take a break. Taking a break from art is totally cool. I think it's actually a huge, really important part of learning, is to be able to let that information sit in your brain and come back, so that when you do start drawing again, it's not necessarily information you're struggling to like keep in this like tight wound little like, you know, keeping a leash on it. You've kind of allowed it to simmer through you, and even if that information isn't totally obvious, it has changed your perception a little bit, even if you hadn't been like right there being like, okay, I have to do this thing that I learned in my last study that I did, you know. So sometimes breaks are excellent, but I also think sometimes we misconstrue what an art block means, or what a lacking motivation means. We could be potentially not lacking in any kind of motivation, but we're constantly stopping ourselves from trying the thing that we are actually motivated to do, out of total fear that it's gonna fail, that it's just gonna show us how terrible we are at this thing, and that we don't deserve to be like doing all this stuff, and we're just wasting time. In the safety and quiet of your own room and your own space, where you don't have to show anyone anything, it's good to examine like where these feelings are coming from, so that you can actually separate it from days where, okay, no, I'm actually art blocked, like I'm actually tired, I want to take a break, I don't want to draw for a little bit, I don't want to have anything to do with art for a little bit, because that definitely happens, right? But learning those nuances is really important too. I don't think we talk about it enough. How do I get better at drawing hands? I mean, you kind of answer your own question, but also, like, it depends on what you're struggling with, because it could just be maybe you're lacking some knowledge about structures of hands, right? Could be a bigger thing with you are struggling with foreshortening and perspective and thinking about stuff in three-dimensional space. Like, all of those things could be a problem. Or you just don't draw it enough. I am absolutely terrible at multitasking. If you think I'm drawing and talking at the same time, I've been trying to do that for so long. It has not happened. I always like stop drawing because I talk with my hands, which has been like a big thing for where I'm like, maybe I should just like get a webcam, because at this point, I'm talking with my hands way too much. It's how I like get all the extra energy out from when I'm talking. But the thing is, it stops me from drawing. Not conducive to a stream in which you don't actually see me gesticulating my hands. So I wish I could talk and draw at the same time, but I fear it is merely an illusion. I am absolutely terrible at multitasking. Hey Flip! It's going pretty good. Yeah, I'd say so. It's really easy to become demotivated when you're working. I think if you are not totally invested in the project, right? Because I think there's something to be said about people who can kind of turn it on and off. I really respect my coworkers that like they go in, they do excellent work, total magic, and then as soon as the clock hits 5, they're out. They're like offline, they're with their families, they're enjoying their life, like they've got a separation of personal life and work. I'm one of those people that can't do that because my work is also what I do for fun. So you know, for me, when work stuff is boring or even like frustrating, or I've just kind of like lost interest in it, it does definitely kill my motivation to work. And when it comes to working, it's a little bit less forgiving. You kind of have to develop a not necessarily resistance, but just sort of a kind of here's the baseline, right? This is what I can make without like necessarily giving my all. I'm not phoning it in, but I'm definitely not like living for it. I'm not like giving my best ideas. I'm not doing all that kind of stuff. I'm doing what I know, like what I'm able to do, what I am confident in doing. I can do that, deliver it, and that gets the job done, right? Not every project needs your whole heart and soul. Not every studio deserves like all of your best ideas. Sometimes you'll get stuck in a job and be like, damn, like I really don't want to give them like more than my bare minimum. And sometimes that's how you stay afloat, right? That's how you kind of like get through moments like sprints or even just projects that are just like, this is really just destroying my love for the genre. And that's why I really advocate for people getting into doing personal work if you don't already, because there's nothing more relaxing, nothing more revitalizing than like being able to kind of leave work after a day of really struggling to be productive and just like taking some time to draw for yourself. Because oh my god, I rediscovered that like a few like a year-ish ago, or even just like earlier this year. It has been bliss, absolute bliss. I've been really enjoying drawing stuff for myself again, and making new characters and revisiting old ones. It's been good. It's been really like my favorite thing to do every day. But it's all about like, you know, just the very specific circumstances that you find yourself in. Not every job is like a stinker from start to finish, right? But there's a level of like, I gotta just know how to do the bare minimum that is still pretty good, that's still pretty solid. You know, I'm not, again, not like totally just turning in garbage, but if you ask me, it could be doing better. Wouldn't a webcam embolden your hand gesturing? Yes, but at the very least, people aren't just looking at like a totally still screen, right? Because then at the very least they can then watch me like waving my hands about and doing all sorts of like gestures and pointing and moving, you know, is sort of like my kind of, I guess, like, what is it, like reasoning for that. But we hit kind of a weird thing about it is I don't like having my face on screen. So I like the fact that I can be sort of just like after the workday where I don't have any makeup, I'm not wearing anything like super fancy. It's literally just like my like super old jacket that I've had since like middle school and shorts, and I can just like be a gremlin in my room, talking to you guys, drawing. Like that's like a good place to be. As soon as I have to put my face on stuff, it gets real personal real fast. So I like this arrangement, and I deeply apologize for the absolute lack of art that happens sometimes when I get really deep into like explaining something that I really shouldn't have been starting to like really shouldn't have started to ramble about. Oh yeah, we can start that soon. Start that in a second. I'd say sketching and silhouettes can go hand in hand, right? Like you don't have to necessarily divide the two. It just makes it very this one? Where did I put my save button? So I recently got a tour box because someone brought it up like the other day. If I've tried it, and I didn't at the time because I hadn't needed one. And then I realized something recently, which is, my, uh, my, hold on, I need to change this so that I can make sure that nothing NDA shows up. My Wacom tablet, my Cintiq, being almost vertical at this point, because I have a monitor arm for it now. The fact that it's almost vertical means that the little remote that I usually use to draw with for my hotkeys does not stay on it anymore. Which is like not the biggest deal, but it is kind of irritating because I kind of depended on being able to lay it flat so that I could reach all the buttons because my hands are small. So I decided to give Torbox a try and just see what it's like, and I got it like literally today. But it's got really different button inputs. I have to relearn everything. So we're gonna see. Maybe I should try that. It's kind of nice. The Torbox has like really cool like haptic stuff. Like I don't know if you can hear this, but let me see. Oh wait. Can you hear that? No. I just think it's pretty neat. Yeah. It's cool. It's like haptic stuff. Torbox is a very like small company that created like kind of this alternative controller for creatives. You can use it on anything, but I got the ooh, I got this one. Or I got the white one. But yeah, it's just got like a bunch of buttons and stuff, and the thing about it is it has a lot of dials and like spinny stuff, but I don't use spinny stuff more than like buttons. So I've had to really economize like where my buttons go. But yes, back to the question. Sketching may be better than silhouettes, maybe it's better to sketch than see how to make a silhouette. Yeah, both of them can work at the same time. I don't think you necessarily have to divide the two. It's just, it gets really complicated when you try to do them both at the same time. But I think it's doable. Like, I personally I really hate separating the two because I think about things in terms of like ensemble. Like literally, like, are they wearing a jacket? Are they wearing like a shirt? Is it tied up? Do they have a waist thing? And if I'm just doing silhouettes, it's like, why don't I just start sketching this from the beginning and just make sure that when I'm drawing the silhouette edges, I'm taking extra care with it. But it works for me, it might not work for you. How do you have new ideas every day? It helps if you have a list of ideas, right? Sometimes I will have like a thought when I'm eating or watching a video, and I'll try to write it down if I am not gonna draw very soon. But you know, I'll think of things like, you know, I'd really like to draw my character. Like, I've been drawing her playing stringed instruments a lot recently. For some reason I love the idea of like drawing kind of the playing like a lute or a guitar right now. So that's been something I've been playing around with, having her sitting, having her dancing, like that kind of stuff. I've been trying to draw a lot more candid posing stuff, and that's been something I'm interested in, but that's also because I have been looking at a lot of more classical paintings, and I love the fact that everyone's sort of moving and doing something, right? They're not just standing like a classic concept art pose. I get really tired of just drawing like someone from a 3/4 view standing straight. It's just so boring. So I think, you know, these ideas are because I'm missing certain things in my work life, so I'm trying to supplement them in my free time. But it's also because I'm looking at art that has all these things and I want to kind of push myself to do more of it. So ideas can come from, you know, your own I guess things that you wish that you could be doing more of. They could be coming from things that you see out when you're just sort of living life or researching. A lot of my ideas are things I just notice other people have done, and I'm like, oh, you know, it'd be really cool to actually draw my character like dancing or running, or I have this story moment in my head that I kind of just want to draw. That's where a lot of my ideas come from. Any tips on studying color, like learning color basics and how to apply them? All I know about is complementary colors. Complementary colors. Depends on what you're trying to do, right? Like if you want to get better at making color palettes, or if you want to be better at using color theory, and color is very much tied to like the application of color theory, which is in itself very abstract, right? It's very much like, oh, these colors on a color wheel, but in real life we're not really working with a color wheel, right? So color wheel is just how we've decided to interpret a color spectrum. And when it comes to actually applying colors, you're dealing with a lot more than just straight up color theory or color palettes. You're dealing with how light interacts with that kind of stuff, how the way that a character is posed and is lit will affect like the sort of look and feel of a certain color choice. And if like an environment is trying to get like a certain mood or certain vibe, like how colors that you didn't really expect would be there because grass is green and the sky is blue, but like what if they weren't, and how does that make it better as a composition? All those things are very, very different from just knowing like complementary colors and whatnot, and they're not even things that you wouldn't necessarily want to learn at the same time. So when you say tips on studying color, I think you should really try to focus on like what is it that you're trying to learn, right? If you're just trying to learn color palettes, that's one thing. You can learn about all the different ways that you can choose color palettes on a color wheel, and then you can go and study how other people have chosen color palettes for characters that you really like, that you think are really like satisfying, and you can kind of do studies on color palettes and see like, but what is the correlation? Oh, okay, there's always usually a maybe light desaturated color with a dark, more saturated shadow, or it's more saturated high light color, more desaturated dark color. There's always a desaturated tone with a more saturated color, and like that kind of balance between in a color palette usually helps create the sense of like calm and maybe just like balance overall. Totally saturated color palettes are a lot more vibrant, but also very like difficult to use. Super desaturated color palettes feel kind of boring sometimes if you don't use them well. When people are using color on a character, they usually have a mixture of saturations, of tones, of all that kind of stuff, and you're not going to necessarily learn that at the same time that you're learning like how do you represent color given a certain lighting scheme and whatnot. Hey, Rainbow Dude. Any advice to make my females look less like males all the time? A couple things, right? You could be really squaring the jaw, without pushing any, like, because the thing is, when we talk about stereotypically masculine, stereotypically feminine traits, it's not so much that all females have soft curves, softer everything, they're slimmer, they're whatever, and all males are hard-edged, angled, whatnot. It's the fact that you have all of those traits on someone that gives them a more masculine or feminine feel. So a feminine character can have a square jaw, but maybe their frame, like their shoulders, are a lot less wide than their hips, and like maybe they don't have a super muscly arm, but they have a pretty well defined torso. A more masculine character can have really more feminine traits, but it's like, well, they have a pretty narrow hips regardless of how like feminine their like their jawline is, or how like how much they lack muscle in certain parts. So it's not so much that you have to do all these things of like making everything soft and fluid and whatnot, but it's that if you want to differentiate it, it's giving certain traits, certain more feminine traits to your female characters, or, you know, really balancing that out. So if your character has a strong jaw, balance it out with maybe giving them a little bit more of like a less chiseled nose, maybe make their like shoulders a lot more narrow, maybe reduce the muscle mass. Kind of like in that's more like roided out, quote unquote, and stick with stuff that's a little bit more like lean built, maybe a bit more like like what are they called, shot put throwers, where they're muscular but they're not necessarily like roided muscular, you know, or like female wrestlers who or even long distance runners, like, you know, they're muscular for sure, but they're not necessarily in the same way built and toned like maybe like a traditional masculine figure might be. That's usually how I've started to balance females to males when I've been drawing them. Do you usually have a schedule for your studio work? Or free work you want to do for yourself? If I'm not working on studio stuff, I'm working on my free stuff, and if I'm not working on my free stuff, I'm doing everything else. Working on work or doing errands or whatnot. One thing I've really liked about working more like traditional 9-to-5s is that I have an excuse to actually get off work, you know. Which is not to say that I actually get off work, but more so that I have an excuse to. That I can say, I'm no longer being paid. I can stop working on this, you know? Before, when I was working freelance, it's like, well, if I don't work on it, then I'm just procrastinating, so I guess I just should work on it. And then I just would always work on work. So, I very much depend on kind of a little bit more of a stricter separation of like, okay, it's 10 p.m, maybe I stop working on stuff. Or, you know, here are normal work hours, I can stop really worrying about being super hyper productive after like 6, even if I'm still working on stuff. Not really color palettes, but color in terms of light, value, undertones, and stuff. Yeah, so I struggle with that stuff too, mainly because I don't deal with color a lot if I don't have to. I don't think I should really be giving you tips on that because, frankly, none of it makes sense to me, as it's not very intuitive for me. So I'd say someone like you know, James Gurney, what's his name? Like Mark Brunet or something. Like people that actually have a much better sense for color would probably be better to ask, because I don't do a lot of color stuff, if you haven't noticed. But it's important to understand that color is all about context, right? It doesn't matter what color something should be. It's more so the context that color is being viewed through. So if you have tinted ambient light around you, that color is going to be interpreted physically in a different way, right? Like, even if you know that this shirt is like blue, it's gonna look a little bit more green if your light is like super saturated in like yellow, right? Even if you know that it's blue, it doesn't really matter. Same with light and dark shadows and stuff like that. It's all about context, right? Values next to each other. It's not about a shadow should be this color. It's more so that in the context of this form turning away in space, this plane and this plane are like maybe a lot more high in contrast in regards to each other because of how strong the lighting is, versus if the lighting is very soft, very dimmed, then the contrast is maybe less so in this area. Or, oh, it's closer to the light, therefore the contrast between like highly exposed areas is a lot less like stark, versus when you're looking at areas that are super turned away from a harsh light, and then in which case there may or may not be more contrast or less contrast within tones of that area. There's the idea of like high key versus low key stuff. Like, is all of your detail found in the dark or is it found in the light, right? When things are in shadow, are they a lot less contrast, or do they have less contrast? Or are things in the light overexposed, and so everything that you're looking at is predominantly found in shadow? Now, there's a lot of concepts with that, and so if you want to really get into learning stuff about color when it comes to light and whatnot, then that's like a whole nother can of worms that I'm not very qualified to talk about. I should have her waving her hands around a lot more. Because I move my hands way too much. But, yeah. If you ever have the misfortune of seeing me actually talk physically, you'll see that I'm always like moving my arms, I'm always moving my hands. It's such a nightmare. So you don't like doing environment designs. So how did you learn environment? How did you learn environment design? Because doing environment design work is pretty time consuming. Do you have any exercise? I'll be honest. Anytime I've had to do environments, it's been an absolute Hail Mary. I have no idea how to make an environment look good. I have just been desperately hoping that I can at least somewhat make it look okay so that I don't get fired. So no, I don't really have any suggestions about environment design because I don't know how to do them. I don't design environments, that's for sure. I might draw or paint environments for like an illustration, but that is not the same as environment design. Do you have any tips on focus? I'm so easily distracted so I feel my studies aren't very effective. So I mean, there's like focus strategies, I guess, but if you're doing studies and you're not feeling very focused, it could be that you're doing studies in a way that is time consuming without actually being very helpful, right? So I'd say like think about when you're doing studies, are you actually putting the most amount of time and effort on the part that you wanted to learn, on the part that you're actually trying to study? Or are you trying to like fully paint this character or like fully draw this thing that has not really a ton to do with the main thing you're trying to learn? Because if you just focus on the thing you're trying to learn, studies should not take you that long, right? They should not take you more than like an hour, a few hours, 20 minutes maybe. Like it's not supposed to, like, each study is not supposed to be a complete recreation of your reference. That's like not the point of studies for the most part. You're trying to learn something very specific. Usually, I would want people to try and learn something very specific when they do studies, because then you don't have to go through the whole song and dance of like, oh, well, I'm trying to recreate this character, this person's hair in this photo, but I really wanted to practice skin tone, painting or whatnot. Do the thing that you wanted to do in the study. Make sure you go into a study knowing exactly what you wanted to do and do that thing and then get out. You don't have to spend all this time trying to make a study like good enough to post or anything like that. Like, you learn the thing and you get out. it's really not worth like spending hours and hours and hours trying to like do a nice complete study if that was not the point. If it is the point, Godspeed. But if it's not, don't do it. Also, personally, I don't think studies have to be boring, right? If you're bored doing a study, like, I think studies could also be when you're just drawing your own stuff, right? A lot of my studies I do when I'm drawing characters on my own time, because I'll realize, like, hey, I'm really struggling trying to draw this, like, pose. I should look up, like, how this arm is supposed to move. And that's a study, right? That's exactly what a study is supposed to be. I needed it at the time. I did one. It just so happens to be another drawing that I did. I try not to separate out, like, this is study time and this is normal drawing time, because I don't like doing studies. I find them really boring. So I try to mix the two, and then I'm a little less bored by the idea of trying to learn or relearn a skill that I've forgotten or whatnot. How do you do background for an illustration as a way I don't fail my clients? Okay, here's the thing. If you don't want to do backgrounds in an illustration, then don't do or don't sell full illustrations if you don't know how to do the background. But that's one thing. Another thing, if you want to start doing backgrounds and illustrations, like, this is an instance where you have to, multiple things have to come together, right? You have to learn perspective. You have to learn composition. You should learn how cinematographers plan their shots. You should learn from people that do this for a living how to arrange a scene, how to focus a scene. You should look at artists who do illustrations, full illustrations, and see how they focus on certain elements that are important to the drawing, right? If it's a splash art, the character and the skill that they're doing is the most important thing. If it's a key art illustration, it's more so the combination of the character, the environment, whatnot. If it's an event piece, right, it's like a moment in time, the actual event that's happening is more important than the character or the environment, more so. So, like, there are different reasons why we make illustrations, and if you're trying to do environments, you have to understand what the point of the illustration is supposed to be. You can't just be drawing, you know, whatever you want and then completely forget that the character is supposed to be the main part of this illustration. So the environment's not even supposed to be that interesting anyway. Yeah, perspective, composition, knowing how to even just draw different elements, different props in an environment is a different thing, right? Getting familiar and comfortable with doing that is like a separate skill. Knowing how to arrange props within a scene is a separate skill. And then comes like everything else, like rendering, lighting, like it's a lot of stuff. You have to figure out what it is that you're trying to learn, because otherwise, yeah, learn everything. You know, like that's just it. You have to learn everything, all of these skills all at once. It's not conducive if you're just like, you know, I don't know how to do environment design. I don't think you're trying to do environment design unless that's specifically what you're trying to do. I think you just are struggling with the idea of drawing an environment, and that is just like, this is just the building blocks of all of it, right? Perspective, composition. It's about knowing how to focus a scene. It's knowing how to treat your environment like a character. And if you can't do that, then don't offer it as something that you can do for your clients until you're very, very comfortable with it. I have had to just bumble my way through learning how to paint environments very poorly. Right? I really don't think any of my environments are very good. I've had to sort of bumble my way learning how to do them. And frankly, I have absolutely nothing to say on the topic because every time I've done it has been an absolute nightmare. I don't know what you mean by solarized. I really should just I should do the petty thing and ban the word tip so that people have to actually explain what question they want from me. what question they want to ask. Because do I have tips for things? No, I don't. I really don't. Because everything is always connected with something else, and there's all this big, massive, like, interwoven fabric of like, well, if you want to do this, you gotta learn this, you gotta learn that. There's no tips with that. So someday I'll do the absolute petty thing and call that out. Well, my starting soon screen does not have that look. It doesn't have any holographic stuff on it as far as I understand. Oh, I forgot that my wallpaper is unsafe. But I don't give a shit. I was looking for a window, but it wasn't here. I closed it a while ago. Yeah. It's a Gustav Klimt piece. Beautiful. How do you go about studying style, body types, and combining two styles to make a unique one? Art style and body types aren't necessarily something I conflate with each other, so what do you mean specifically about style? Also, the just like flat answer to combining two styles to make a unique one, you take some elements from one, you take some elements from the other, you mash them together, it's a new one. Like, it's like, you know, there's flat answers to these, but I don't think that's actually the question you're asking or you want to ask, right? You're asking about body types. That doesn't have anything to do with art style, in my opinion. So I'm not really necessarily sure what you want to know specifically. Q Fangs class. Choose an IP and draw 2 bodies in the style of said IP, and I wanted to challenge myself on combining 2 IPs. Okay. I think the point of the homework is to learn and practice analyzing style. So I think combining 2 IPs kind of defeats the purpose of the homework itself. But I'll talk specifically about drawing bodies in the style of an IP. Again, you're not looking at body type. You're looking at specifically style markers on how that style translates fundamental reality, right? So if we just look at how different artists communicate muscles, right? That's a complete, like, there are many different ways for you to describe anatomy based on how much or how little or how specific or how dramatic you make, you choose to draw them, right? So I think the point of the homework is to analyze the very specific style markers that define one IP from another. So I'll give you an example, right? Just because it makes it easier if I just show you. So I'll take something from Yo Yoshinari, just because I think a lot of people look at him as a style marker type of artist. He has a very specific way of stylizing curves and actions, which is very unique to him. So I'll use Yo Yoshinari for one example. And then, let's just go on ArtStation. Why am I signed out? Sign in. I have to log in on the mobile app to give myself permission to log in. The website is bizarre. Okay, I'm gonna look at my list of things. I think I find an artist that has a pretty distinct style. Yeah, Tosho's gonna force me to work after. Okay, so here's a piece from Art of Maki, right? Who is excellent, but 2 very different styles, and we're just gonna pretend that these are IPs. We're gonna pretend that these are 2 different IPs, right? Obviously, very different types of art. The 2 very different styles of art. But what we're looking for is how they differ from each other, right? So, let's look at Art of Maki first. Art of Maki, right, and I'll write their name. On ArtStation. Art of Maki is much more realistic when it comes to on the style spectrum than Yo Yoshinari, obviously. But what's important is that we see where they are similar, what they choose to do, like in a kind of similar fashion, what they choose to say, what they choose to not say, and where they differ. So parts that they differ. Art of Maki, in a lot of their stuff, tends to be very specific about these very small. Let me choose something that's a little bit more specific. These very subtle changes in form, right? It's a lot more realistic. Obviously, there are places where it becomes very smooth, but there's a juxtaposition between places where detail is very specific and places where it's a little bit more smoothed out. Yoshinari smooths things out to an incredibly expressive degree that completely overtakes, like, whatever underlying structure is supposed to be there. It's not that he can't be more realistic, it's that he chooses not to for a very specific reason. And it's predominantly because he's an animator. He works in animation. A lot of his stuff has to communicate more than just the structure underneath. It has to communicate motion and movement. So when he's drawing characters, he's more focused on what he's describing with this line, with these strokes that he's making. It's not necessarily that they are like doing different things, but they're choosing to do it in different ways, right? He's focusing on this kind of elegant curve, these straight actions through the pose, and Artamaki is a lot more focused on structure. And so when you're trying to distinguish between these two different styles in terms of IP, when it comes to drawing something in the style of Yoshinari, you're looking at how do you simplify a lot of that complexity into something that is a lot more fluid, a lot more focused when it comes to movement and abstraction. It's a lot more stylized through the lens of motion. It's stylized through the lens of action, through their action lines, through like the point of the pose, through the momentum. That's how they're stylized. That's why he chooses this, that one wrinkle over any of the other wrinkles he could have picked on this arm. He chose that one to draw. That was a very specific choice. Meanwhile, Art of Maki chooses to draw all of these different folds because it adds a sense of physicality, of realism to their work. That's the precise reason why they draw this way, is because that's what they like. So, two different reasons for making the same choices, right? They both wanted to put some level of cloth simulation in their work, but how they choose to do it is different because it's not as important for Yoshinari to be describing every fold that is present on a piece at all times. That's not the point. Because he has to prioritize his line economy for the sake of the style that he works in, which is in animation. So that's the point, I think, of the Q-Fang homework, is to look at an IP and see the exact style markers which define that IP and set it apart from other things. Because style is a very important decision that is made in a production. It is something that is both like a marketing thing, it ties in with production, right? It's like a huge decision to make. So everything had to have been made with intent, with a very like precise reasoning for why do we prioritize certain things and then deprioritize others. Why does Art of Maki prioritize a much more realistic fabric simulation, much more realistic body simulation with wrinkles and folds, and a lot more of a precise kind of like silhouette read than Yoshinari? That difference is what determines the style markers that you're trying to convey. That's what you want to be focusing on when it comes to the homework for Q-Fang. Mixing two different IPs is not necessarily wrong, but I just don't think it's the point of the homework, because what he's trying to get you to do is to think about style not so much in just like, this artist draws in this style, that artist draws in that style, I want to be like that artist, so I'm going to copy their style. It's knowing why they make those decisions. What does that decision do for you, for that piece of art? What does it help you to achieve? What does Yoshinari lose by not doing a more realistic cloth simulation in his work? But what does he gain by deprioritizing drawing cloth that way? He gains line economy. He gains the ability to control the silhouette of his characters in a way that is a lot more dynamic and a lot more specific than Art of Maki does typically. Not to say Art of Maki can't, it's just that in this specific case, they chose not to. And that's for a very specific reason. It's a much more realistic piece of work. It's a lot more focused on like proportionally very realistic, a lot more nuanced anatomy. And that's the point. So I'd say in the context of your homework, stick with one IP and really try to understand how it sets itself apart from other things. I think that's the reason why he assigned it, from what I remember when I took his class as well. But yeah. Yeah, I'd say take it slow. I think students really have this pressure to like get things done somehow physically faster, or they get really like tense about it. Like, take it slow, really analyze it, because the point of the homework is to make you question things that you took for granted before. That's the main reason why anyone really assigns homework, is, and if it's a good piece of homework, right? That's not just busy work. They're trying to get you to analyze something in a deeper way, potentially to get you to make some conclusions that you might not have had before. And you don't really do yourself any services by trying to outmaneuver the homework without understanding why the homework was assigned in the first place. Tojo, do you want to start do you want to write down questions as they come in for a little bit, and I'm just gonna like focus on drawing for a second? Yeah, and then I'll catch up in like a bit. But I'll still like respond to chat. I just won't answer like super heavy questions. It'd be nice if we could do like a point exchange, like people can ask a question by exchanging points, but I feel like we probably couldn't control that for the most part. Now I'll hydrate. Also, thank you, Flip, for the tier 1 sub. Yeah, but I also don't think a lot of people who come to my streams are super familiar with like how Twitch works. So their inclination is not necessarily to like root through the channel point menu. So it must be a little bit more informal. Yeah, and I don't really want to stop people from just asking questions, because normally it's okay, but again, I get really distracted. I really like answering questions, so I get really distracted by it, and then I stop drawing, and then here we are, months later. Thank you. I'll drink water. I should probably have like a focus stream one of these days. I might do that on one of the extra streams that we do. Maybe one of the stream days I will just have like a focus thing on, and then We'll just knock out a bunch. Or I'll also be very lazy and I just won't be productive. Who knows? Oh my gosh. It's the weekend! I completely forgot it's Friday. Oh my gosh, it's the weekend! This is very exciting. The gif of Daniel Craig? Labor Day weekend, yes. Oh my gosh. DK Sparta, thank you for the Twitch Prime sub. We very much appreciate it. Whoa! I'm clicking buttons and I don't know what they do. Oh, wait, no, yes, I do know this video. Is it gonna be loud?
Ladies and gentlemen, the weekend.
I agree. The weekend. I will hydrate. Union's always kind of been complicated.
jure, ça fera bonne impression en ville. Tu sais ce qu'on dira?
Mourir sous, c'est mourir debout et je me fous des racontars. L'histoire jugera, madame.
It's just such aggressive French in that song. I'm trying some like YouTube playlists now to see if we are okay, but that's good. Yeah, it's okay if... Okay, neat, yeah. We can just replace that song with something else. I want to move that arm. Night, Luna. Thank you for coming. Let me finish this one and I will answer your question. She has a arm made of water, I think. Get too far out. Let's deselect. Oh, this one. How are you? How have you been? Oh, how long have you had COVID? I should do this over. $10. Oh. Hope most of your symptoms have alleviated? Or whatever your worst symptoms were. Give her bigger thighs than that. Ghibli mix? Oh, nice. Hey, Remix! Welcome, welcome. like has to be longer. I'll say my favorite feature of Paint Will Sigh is this one. And then when you look at it, it actually has the texture of the pencil you're using. It's crazy! Not even Clip Studio has this shit. This is great. It doesn't have like symmetry tools. It doesn't have like liquefy or anything. But like just that one tool, I'm just like, this is like the best thing ever. God tier programming. I stan the creator of Paint Will Sigh for the rest of my life. I mean, he's just been like such a good dude. For as long as Paint Will Sigh has been out, his stuff has been the same price. It's one guy working on Paint Will Sigh. God tier. Yeah, I really fell off of Paint Will Sigh for a bit, but coming back has been really fun. It's just a fun program. Very simple, very clean. One of the nicest looking ones. Like, I'll be honest, Clip Studio kind of clunky looking sometimes. Clip is... And that's not saying like Photoshop is better. It's just Paint Will Sigh is just so pretty. It's so like, I don't know, the new Sigh 2 is just actually gorgeous. Even better if he plans on implementing like other modes for stuff. It's not. What's going to happen is that Clip Studio is planning on releasing new editions of the program itself. So currently we're in Clip Studio V1. They plan on releasing Clip Studio V2, V3, and so on and so forth. And what they're offering is the opportunity for you to try out new functions, and and settings that will be available in Clip Studio V2 earlier than the release date by paying a subscription to Clip Studio V2. None of those functions will be unavailable to you unless you they will be available to you with the full release of Clip Studio 2, which will still be a perpetual license. It's just the running up to that program, as far as I understand, is basically beta testing. Clip Studio is not going to stop being updated. It's not going to stop being supported. It might become less of a priority once we get to V3 or 4 of Clip Studio, but currently it's like really not as dire as a lot of people are making it out to be. I will say that like Clip has already experimented with paid subscription with their like iOS app, so it's not like they haven't already jumped into using something like that, but this instance is not necessarily like of, I think, any overwhelmingly different concern. Well, to be fair, the release was extremely confusing, and personally I don't think that this is how they should have described it. I don't think this is how they should have done it anyway. I think they should have just come out with V2. Or announced that V2 is coming out. And if they wanted to do beta testing stuff, they could have done something similar to Paint Tool Sai, in which you can use a very neutered version of the final of the program, as long as you had like a pre-existing license. But obviously you don't get extra money for doing that. So I don't necessarily like think that it is ill-intentioned, just more so like poorly marketed. I think on principle, though, it's not like a crazy concept. But I'm kind of not surprised, I guess. Like, Clip Studio has always been kind of clunky in a variety of ways. And I don't think while they've had like a pretty strong international audience, I don't necessarily think their marketing team is super like well versed in, other than like doing frequent sales and stuff. Like, I don't think their international audience is super like in tune with, I think, what their announcement structure is like. I can't tell if I'm doing this right. I think I am. Regardless, you'll still be able to use Clip, it's fine. I will pet Peach after stream. Fortunately, that redeem is a little outdated because she no longer hangs out with me in my office, or no longer hangs out. She and I no longer hang out as much because I work in my office. She does not come into my office. But I will give her pets, I promise. Get up and stretch. Let me take this opportunity to switch to standing mode on my standing desk. I wonder if you'll hear the motor. I don't know. I assume it's like bone or something. This up a little bit. So now to see the whole sketch. This is a D&D character, so I don't know where they got it, but they might have been original. Play mouse. Yeah, it didn't help that I had to take a break for a little bit, multiple times. So it's my bad, but we're almost there. We are sub 30, which is saying a lot from our 200 list from before. Where did I put my save? What button did I set that to? Okay. I think that was it for this one. So Photoshop, and then I export that out. Okay, so I'm going to shift. Okay, this one has quite a few characters in it, so. Does this one not have a bottom part to her? Two character full body and a colored headshot. Okay, so let's start with the other one. Oh, what was the question that we got a little bit ago since I finished with the other one? No worries. Ways to improve dynamic posing and drawing hands. Okay, so when it comes to dynamic posing, I guess, like, what is the problem specifically that you are struggling with, right? Is it that you feel like your poses are stiff, or that you don't even know where to start with drawing characters that are more dynamic, or does it feel like you can't invent poses, or, you know, because if it's just like improving, the only way that you can really improve with poses is doing a mixture of figure drawing, studying from life, and applying the things that you learn about, like, the human body during those figure studies to the poses you're trying to do outside of your studies. Which, like, poses are one of those things where it's just kind of like, once you have a pretty solid idea for how poses are constructed, like, if you know how to draw the human body to a certain extent, posing just becomes a matter of, like, trying to convey life and energy in something that inherently does not have it, right? So when it comes to, like, stiffness, it's a lot, I think, partially mental and partially, like, physically, how do you draw it. I found that my poses felt a lot more stiff when I couldn't physically imagine myself doing the pose at the same time. Like, as I'm drawing the pose, can I imagine myself tensing, or you know, being in the same position, feeling the tension in, like, my legs? If I'm, like, holding something, or if I'm about to strike, do I feel that, like, innate sense of momentum, like I'm about to do something? That's, like, a very specific moment to be in, right? It's recognizing what are the markers for stiff versus relaxed poses, right? So what are markers for poses that are about to be in motion? What are markers for poses that are more relaxed versus what makes a pose more stiff? Oftentimes it's a kind of, like, partnership between maybe the pose is not exaggerated enough, right? Something I learned, or something a teacher told me, was that oftentimes exaggeration brings you closer to reality than trying too hard to be very, like, conservative when you're drawing a pose, right? The more you can kind of push a pose, the closer you kind of get to that energy that you innately attribute to a dynamic pose. And that's kind of what we're trying to convey, right? It's not so much just, like, the act of raising one leg and bending the knee, bending the other knee backwards, raising one arm, putting the other arm back, and it's like, this is running. No, it's the feeling of, like, kicking off of that back foot, of, like, pushing your body forward. That, like, line of action is what they always talk about with animation and stuff. It's because the idea of, like, pushing through emotion innately has you going through this arc, right? And your whole body moves through that arc. Because when you're pushing into a dynamic pose, because dynamic poses are often either, you know, like, they're usually in motion, or in some case about to be, or coming out of a kind of dynamic movement, like, kind of cycle, right? So you have to think about, what am I trying to convey in this moment of, like, are they preparing to do something? Are they landing after, like, you know, a big movement? Or are they in the middle of the movement, right? When you're in the middle of a movement, you can't do too many complicated things with your body. And often stiff poses are somewhat due to an overcomplication, or a severe, like, lack of exaggeration, right? So we talked about how sometimes you make a pose a little bit more conservative, over time, just naturally, because you're trying to work out like, okay, here's where the arm is and here's the muscle. The more you try to work out a sketch, the more energy it loses, right? Sometimes poses come out to be extremely stiff and kind of lackluster after you've worked on it for a little bit. On top of that, right, we're talking about overcomplication in a pose. When you are single-mindedly going through a movement, you're not thinking about like, oh, let me like pose my fingers in a certain way and my like arms in a certain way. Like everything's kind of being pulled with that like forward momentum, whatever momentum you're trying to create. And so oftentimes simplifying a pose in a way kind of adds that energy back in, because you're not stopping that. If you think about it kind of like chi or the like kind of the Asian idea of like energy flowing through the body, right? Like you don't want to stop it at like a weird bent joint. You want to like have it flow through. If you watch dancers, fighters, like there's the idea of like rolling through something to prevent that like force from really impacting your like muscles and your bones. Those kind of ideas of like how to maintain an energy through something, that kind of very not just flowy, but just this continuous sense of like you're pushing and pulling this energy somewhere, as opposed to like knotting it at like a joint that's bent weird, or like an arm that's kind of like up in a way that's not very not very cohesive with the rest of the pose. So poses that are overcomplicated, poses that are not as exaggerated as they could be, are oftentimes the most common culprits for that kind of like stiffness, right? And so I would generally recommend, like, if you're trying to do dynamic poses, really try to do more gestures, try to draw characters looser, really learn to simplify a pose down to its core elements. A lot of line of action stuff generally is very helpful. But also, like, try to draw poses in motion, right? Try to watch a movie and draw some poses from it. Try to watch, like, a documentary video, and try to capture that, like, small moment of movement, instead of, like, sitting down and really trying to focus on, like, okay, how do I draw this body? I have, like, all this anatomy I gotta worry about. The more you try to fuss with technical stuff in a pose, oftentimes the more you lose throughout the time that you spend on that. So, basically figure drawing, basically gesture drawing, but also really feeling the pose and the kind of movement in yourself, right? Something I felt was very like helpful to me was in a figure drawing class where my teacher was saying, like, you know, you have to really feel like you're the model that's sitting up there in front of the class. Like, when you're drawing a person sitting, you have to feel as if you feel the gravity pulling you down. You feel it like grounding you, so that when you draw someone, you're not drawing them floating, but in the pose of a sitting person, right? Until you feel that gravity flowing kind of through you, really embodying it, feeling like how it's slightly pulling the shoulders down, it's pulling the legs down a little bit. You know, legs aren't totally 90 degrees when you sit, they kind of slope. You might relax a little bit, they kind of like move to the side. All these things, the more you feel it, the more inclined you are to actually imbue that into your own work. So those are the things I have to say about dynamic posing. Drawing hands is much more of a technical thing. Typically when you struggle to draw hands, it's a lot more of a question of like, do you understand kind of the underlying structure of hands? And are you keeping that in mind when you're trying to draw different poses, right? Because one of the biggest things that people struggle to do with hands is really imagining them as 3D objects. That's why you see a lot of people do hands that are like, they do this, right? And then that's like it. Hands don't really exist in between this front and back. They kind of exist predominantly in like very orthographic ways. As soon as you start thinking of the hand as and the palm as this like structure that turns in space, that each finger is, you know, really cylinders that turn in space, the more you're willing to accept that like each kind of small change to the angle of the hand will drastically impact the like silhouette and the kind of look and the feel of the fingers. And that's not stuff that you can really invent without actually seeing it for yourself. So more so than doing, I think, studies, I really honestly recommend just looking at your own hands, right? Like kind of look at your own hands, turn them slowly. If you have to, like feel them, right? Like really press on your palm and really feel like how immovable it is, right? You've got muscle, you've got tendon, you've got veins in there. They're all packed together around your what is it, phalanges? Yeah, I think those are hands, right? Those are fingers. They're like all so tightly wrapped around your phalanges that like you can't bend that palm. But there's a lot of movement that you're still able to get even with this immovable structure in the middle of your hand, right? So thinking about how that the fingers kind of utilize the space that they're given to create more of that flow and that energy and that kind of like you know, movement without destroying the internal structure of the hand itself. Remembering that fingers, hands, palms, they have the bones inside of them and the muscles on top of them. And so they're three-dimensional objects. Rotating them changes their shape drastically. They're not perfectly round, they're not perfectly flat. There's a bunch of small muscles there that will impact how it looks. And as soon as you have an understanding that that's what makes hands complex, because ultimately it's just you know, a slightly rounded like box with tubes on the top, right? That's about as deeply complicated as the just like the straight structure, but obviously there's more to it than that, right? There's a lot of flesh and muscle that changes the shape of it. It's flatter in certain areas than others. So that's what makes a hand complex, is the fact that in three-dimensional space, so much of the hand is unexpectedly, like, you know, they're unexpectedly flat in certain areas, round in other areas. There are, like, bits and pieces of, like, flesh in your palm will change how your palm sits. There's like the divot inside, but there's also the divots in between your fingers, right? The meat of the palm and then the meat of the kind of like side of I don't know really what it's called. It's like the muscle that's closest to your thumb and then the muscle that's underneath your pinky. Like, you know, those things, not necessarily round, not necessarily flat. Like that's kind of what makes hands complicated. But drawing hands doesn't have to be like this terrible exercise and in like, you know, three-dimensional imaging. If you just really predominantly focus on maintaining that structure, right, and thinking about how do all these fingers fit in this pose, how do they not intersect with each other, how do I maintain that structure in the hand, and then you work with that by observing hands, using reference, looking at your own, and eventually you'll start to realize, like, there's nothing really, like, you get complicated, but then when you pull it back, it's like, hands are fundamentally about as complicated as anything else. And they're not really, like, you don't really have to fight too hard to get to a point where hands are perfectly passable. If you want to get to, like, a really realistic sense, then that's a whole nother can of worms. But hands are, again, essentially these flat, rectangle, boxy looking, like, structures with, like, cylinders at the top. You operate with that, you understand three-dimensional turning in three-dimensional space, and you've basically got all of the working parts to draw hands. But I cannot overstate the importance of using reference if you are struggling with structure, right? Until you understand, because we all know that bones exist inside our bodies, but people will very rarely include them when they're drawing them because we don't normally have to think about structure because it's not something we see every day. Once you really start to understand what parts of the human body are non-negotiable and what parts you can kind of stylize and start to push and stuff like that, all of it becomes rather similar in terms of complexity. And hands are not really any different. So hopefully somewhere in there you make sense. Hey, bunny. Thank you. I love you, Studio Ghibli, but only so many times that I can listen to the same song. You know any good books or references for studying the anatomy of the skull? Nope. I just Google skull. I don't have books on that kind of stuff. I don't really collect like how to draw books. I predominantly only buy art books of artists or shows or whatever. So I do not really have any like recommendations on any like resource books, basically. How do I feel? Okay, although I am getting a little tired. I'll probably finish this one and we'll see how I feel then, because this one has 2 other pieces to it, not including this one. So we'll see how I feel after I finish this. It has been pretty hot where I live, so I think I'm feeling a little like dazed. I've been good. How are you? Not particularly. Honestly, I think I'd not to make you guys feel bad. I sometimes feel like my art is a little bit stiffer because I'm like a little bit more worried about the drawing not turning out. So a lot of my sketches that I do in my free time are honestly a lot better, in my opinion. But I don't hate the stuff that I do on stream. But it is a little bit like I am performing a little bit when I'm streaming. Sunburns, thank you for the tier 1 gift sub. Thank you, thank you. Oh, ice water's just like unbeatable. It's so good. I think you can't get any better than that. It has to be iced for me. Can't really struggle to drink like warm or even just like room temp water. I have to have it cold. I mean, it's like, to me, it's like the same reason why people like carbonation, right? I don't know. I just find like ice water is just so much more, like, yeah, just nice to drink. I don't know. Gosh. 707 drawing. Yeah, I remember when I was into Mystic Messenger for like a hot 5 minutes before, I couldn't stand the fact that they kept texting me. I was like, just don't talk to me. Stop talking to me. Don't message me. Don't talk to me. I don't want to hear from you. And then I'm like, wait, that's the whole point of this game. Maybe I shouldn't play this game. But I really appreciate you've been around for so long. Thank you. Thought process during drawing. What was the most difficult part to get to where you are now? Thought process while drawing. I'd say that for the most part, I'm usually, kind of coming up with immediate solutions to the lines I'm drawing. Right, I'm trying to, like, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking about, like, where am I trying to go with this? But I'm usually pretty focused on, like, the minute decisions I'm making, and then when I zoom out, I'm thinking about, like, okay, how do these decisions impact, like, the overall pose and the silhouette and all that kind of stuff. So I usually think about a lot of things when I'm drawing. But then there are some times where I feel like I'm kind of not even thinking at all about the drawing, and I'm just sort of auto-correcting things as they come up, but for the most part just thinking about, like, the story or the character that I'm trying to convey, and it really depends. It's easier for me to focus on the drawing part when I'm doing streams and stuff than story stuff. Story stuff is very, like, it's a very, like, intimate process. So I generally don't, it's kind of like being asked to roleplay on stage in front of a bunch of people when you've never done it before. Because, like, I do a lot, I, like, talk a lot to myself, I, like, think about, like, different scenarios, so when if you watch me just draw normally, I usually hop between, like, multiple different scenes in, like, a given, you know, kind of either project or, like, plot, so I'm thinking about a lot of different things when I'm drawing. But during streams, it's most often just like, okay, where am I going next? How am I gonna finish this? Like, is this the right decision? Do these shapes look good? Is this stiff? Like, all that kind of stuff. And what was the most difficult part to get to where you are now? Difficult part? I say not so much difficult as just more of like, kind of like, I wish I made a better decision back then. Or regretful, I guess. Wish I was someone who, from a much younger age, wanted to try more things. But I'm a big scaredy cat. Like, I love staying in my comfort zone. If I'm good at one thing, I'll do that thing forever. And it takes a lot of, like, back and forth with myself to really, kind of push myself out of my own comfort zone. And it happens very rarely. Because I am someone who is apathetic. I'm content to let myself wallow in my comfort zone until it becomes professionally dangerous for me to not be growing, and then I'm like, oh shit, I should have done more before, and then try to catch up. generally I worked up to, I mean, that's kind of the issue, right? Like, you spend so much time working on one skill that you don't feel confident in, like, all the other ones. But generally, like, I worked up to environments a little bit. I tried to do, like, small things, like, maybe just, like, drawing them for a little bit, and then learning, like, okay, well, here's how lighting kind of affects environments. And very basic stuff. I don't have a very robust understanding of, like, light and composition and stuff, but getting to a point where, like, you know, if I'm struggling in the moment, I'm looking at other artists, I'm looking at photo references, I'm trying to analyze, like, environment artists who have been doing this for way longer than me and their habits, and how can I break that down, and, like, what are things that they tend to do in areas of focus and areas of not focus, how do they push things back in distance, what are their colors like. I'll make, like, charts about like, back here's the difference between, like, here's literally graphing, like, on a color wheel screenshot, like, okay, here's the difference between, like, this is how much their contrast is between these two tones, and this is how far it travels on the distance of the color wheel. What does that say if I compare that to other artists who have done other things? Like, that's what I tend to do. I'll go full stop on a, like, analytical sense, just so that I can catch up small things towards figuring out, like, places that I am struggling. And obviously, a real, like, kind of demonstration of mastery is when you can make it look easy, right? And I've always struggled very much with doing environments, but, you know, that's why I stress and emphasize the importance of, like, learning tools and not techniques, right? Like, you should be learning how to learn. You shouldn't be learning specifically one person's process. Because as soon as you suddenly need to start learning things on your own accord, you can't rely on someone else to have already written a guide to teach you how to do it, or have someone explain to you tips on how to get better at this. You have to learn how you learn, so that when you need to, you can pull out all your tools. You can be like, okay, I've got this much time to figure out how to catch up to this level. I need to at least be able to do this, render to this amount. Like, how many tools do I have? Can I retrofit these things so that things that I use to color and paint characters and render characters and design characters can be used to design an environment, a prop, and all those kinds of things, right? Like, it's rehashing, reusing, reutilizing your pre-existing knowledge to tackle a current problem. Not so much, hey, let me just sit down and learn environments all over again. It's a totally different thing. Like, all these tools are very similar to each other. You just gotta learn how to apply them differently. And I don't claim to do it well or right, but, like, fact of the matter is like, yeah, you will struggle with two things looking very different when it comes to, like, comfortability levels of, like, hey, I've been doing characters my whole life. Suddenly I need to do props and environments and demonstrate an okay understanding of perspective. Like, oh shit, I guess I gotta start learning. I guess I gotta start, like, really emphasizing that and working on that. And in working on that, my characters then start to change because I start becoming more aware of things. Like, when I paint characters, I start to become more aware now of what it means to have a focal point and having that kind of fade off of detail, and how to emphasize, like, texture in certain areas with de-emphasizing it in others. Like, those things I learned from having to paint, like, trees and forests and being like, I can't possibly paint all of these leaves. Like, no one does that. Obviously no one's done that. If they do, it doesn't even look that good, right? Like, people that have rendered each individual leaf, like, it's busy, it's chaotic, and sometimes it works, but most of the time it doesn't. So most good artists, environment artists, will find a way to kind of, like, make that easier on themselves, to not spend so much time on these, like, minute details when they could be driving your attention elsewhere. And I had to learn how they interpreted that concept towards environments that I had been learning to apply to characters. And that's ultimately the back and forth that you have to do when you are someone who predominantly does one thing. I predominantly only do characters. That is very well known about me. But if I need to, I'll pivot, because I'm willing to rectify the fact that I have spent most of my life doing one thing and one thing only. And that's why learning tools is important to me, because without the tools to understand like how to learn, how to analyze things, like I wouldn't have been able to do most of the jobs that I've been asked to do in my career. You have to be willing to some extent, like modify your direction, modify your workflow, and maybe even step up to the task of learning something when you don't, when there's like a need to do so. And I tried. With all of those environments, I tried my best. And that's all. That's all I could do. I could only try my best once I've done all this learning and all this studying. I hate it. I hate it so much. But I'll do it if I have to. I don't really think my thoughts on AI have resolved enough for me to have like a real opinion on it. Obviously, I am opposed to using AI in my own art. I don't find AI art very impressive. And I don't need that kind of technology, right? But some people find that it allows them to engage in spaces that they couldn't before, and I don't want to gatekeep art for that. But again, I don't think I really understand, like, or really, I guess here's the thing, I don't really care to understand how that's going to affect art, because I'm really only going to focus on what I can do in my own work, I guess. I think people should spend less time being afraid, if they can, just because I don't think it's very conducive when students get really in their heads about the future of an industry that they're not yet a part of, to the point where it stops them from actually getting in. So, I don't know. It's a thing that is currently going on. I don't find it very impressive, nor very useful, but it's bigger than me, so it is what it is. Yes, go ahead. Best technique for learning or practicing rendering? Technique for learning? My technique for learning that I generally tell people has predominantly been the same for most things. Where you go in and decide precisely what it is you're trying to learn. And it has to be very specific. You should be very specific about what it is you want to get out of a study, right? Or a practice session or whatever. There are times where I said, I want to learn how to paint the underside edge of the eyelid, or the under eye, or the eyelid on the bottom of the eye, because I want to learn how to properly place cool tone shadows to not destroy the kind of lividity within skin tone. I was just focusing on that area, right? So I would pick an appropriate reference. Generally, I'd try to pick photos, but sometimes doing a study based off of another piece of art is like kind of the point, right? If you're learning how to do brushstrokes and stuff like that. And you decide like, this is the very specific thing I'm trying to learn from this. And you approach the study specifically to accomplish that goal. Not to replicate the painting, not to replicate the photo, but just purely to achieve and understand what information you're missing, so that you can then go and do it yourself. And sometimes it takes a couple iterations and a couple different studies to really figure out like what am I trying to learn? What is it that I'm trying to get out of this? What is it that I can get out of this? So you do that, right? You get to a point where you're like, okay, here's a couple things that I've realized. Right? If I want to paint in a certain range of skin tones, if I want to paint the under eye, I should try to err on the side of this side of the color wheel and this side of the hue cube, depending on the tone of the skin. Right, this tends to be more desaturated, not necessarily so much in like certain areas on the face where it's much more gray, but I'm looking at these very specific parts, and I feel like I've gotten some notes that I can work on and I can apply. So you take a little bit of a break from that study, and you go and apply it to your own work. Now the thing is, you're not trying to replicate the study. You're trying to apply what you learned to your own art. So you make a piece of art that's completely different from the study, preferably something that you're actually interested in drawing or painting or whatever, and you try to apply those notes straight up. If you had to physically write those notes, just sit down and apply them to the painting. See how much you remember, and then take a few days, or take a day, sleep on it. Come back, do it again. Paint, draw, do whatever, and try to apply the same notes that you learned from the previous day. Now compare the piece that you did, the study that you did, and the two pieces that you did after it, right? Compare the study and the two personal pieces that have a bit of a time difference between them, and see what you missed out on. See what you forgot in the course of trying to apply the thing that you were learning. See what you forgot to include, what you didn't manage to incorporate into your muscle memory. Make a note of it, make a note of what you did manage to do, and then make another piece. Or, if you feel like you're still kind of losing the thread, you don't really understand it, try and make another study, focusing on that very specific thing you don't understand. I think comparing and contrasting different, examples of literally physical evidence of you trying to apply something is a lot more helpful than just doing a study and moving on, right? Because the idea is you do over time forget certain things that you've learned. That's just a natural part of being alive, being a human. And so when you can, I think it's really good to compare and contrast how much you actually remember to apply to your own art and how much you forget over the course of doing a study and then taking a break and then coming back. Because once you have like an idea of what that's like, then, oh wait, do they want 2 of this? Oh, I think this is just the same character. Okay. Once you like have a better idea of like that process, it'll be a lot easier for you to keep in mind this idea that like the point of a study is not to just paint a face or paint a picture or copy a reference. The point of a study has always been to specifically target the thing that you're trying to learn, take it out of the study and incorporate it back into your own work. If you are unable to incorporate the notes that you made or the observations that you had during your study, the study was worthless. It's the truth for pretty much everything, right? It's not just painting and rendering, it's for everything. Anatomy, composition, like all those things. Studies can be a waste of time. The way that you make them not a waste of time is knowing exactly what you want to get out of it, or at least having a very clear question that you want to have answered. And then trying your best to really keep a grasp on that thing that you're trying to learn and really like physically trying to remember to incorporate it into your day-to-day work, right? Eventually some things will fall off and you have to relearn them, but predominantly you want to try your best to reinforce that information whenever you can. So if you don't know what you're doing wrong, something that I like to do sometimes is to really go kind of analytical about it in a way. I'll literally like write notes all over like my work. I like to compare it to someone who, if I don't know what's wrong, but I know that I like what they're doing better, right? If I don't know what I'm doing wrong, but I like what someone else is doing better, I try to put the two side by side. And this is a very tricky thing because you could potentially put a piece side by side that you don't actually want to use as a reference for your future art. You just like the art, which is a different thing. You can like art and not want it to be influencing you in your own personal work. But if you find someone who can be a good reference for you, I think one that really embodies something in their work that you think that you're missing, if you can sit down and really compare the two, and this is like a personal exercise, right? This is not like you should become them. I'm literally just saying you should look at the two, compare and contrast, like what are things that you notice that they're doing that seem to be missing in your own work. It could be more obtuse things like, you know, I think there's just something about their line work that's a lot more it just seems to help and elevate the art. Or it could be something like, literally, I don't know how to draw ears. You know, it could be a whole range of things. But the important part is that you recognize, I don't know if I want to do another one. You recognize that, oh, thank you for the raid. There's like a clear, that there will be evidence of like various things that are missing in your work that they tend to have that you're gonna subconsciously kind of catch on to as like, I want to have that feel or that technique or that thing. But until you see physical evidence of like the differences between the two, you might not be able to actually verbalize like that's what's wrong, right? And here's the thing, you can be wrong about what's wrong. That's also fine. a couple of weeks spent kind of barking up the wrong tree is not necessarily a waste if what you were doing during that time still kind of helped you move something forward, right? Because part of learning is also understanding how to judge your own work. Part of learning is also understanding how to critique your own work, see what's wrong, even if intuitively that's not really like something you natively do yourself. Like, you're not like, for me, I don't necessarily think I'm a very technical person. I'm not really that well trained, and I don't have good fundamentals, honestly. But even though I can't do it, I can recognize when other artists are really good at structure, when they're really good at certain things like turning objects in three-dimensional space, right? And that's because I've spent so long trying to figure out why I liked certain artists more than others. Why there are artists that I've loved for way longer, for so many more years, and some artists that just fall off. The artists that fell off were artists that did not have structure as a pretty integral part of their work. There were artists that I liked because they did anime work or they did fan art, and then a couple years later I look and I'm like, I suddenly see so many things that I don't like about this style or this piece. But then there are artists that have transcended that, been my favorite, or have been with me for so long, and when I look at their stuff, it's because I can feel that mastery. It's something that's really important to me that I want to have more in my own work, and it took me years to understand that that was the point, right? The reason why I like certain artists more than others is because they managed to like achieve a mastery of form, of three-dimensionality, of structure, and can seemingly break it whenever they want without actually destroying the inherent integrity of the piece. And I wanted, and I've always been driven or drawn to that level of mastery. Because for me, that's what I like about art, is when I can feel like someone has had full control over everything about this piece. It's like everything they did was purposeful, it was planned, this shape, these lines, this costume was meant to look this way. Everything had a reason, everything was there. And even if it didn't have a reason, it takes a good artist to know how to incorporate a happy accident back into a piece properly. So that's something I really value in art, but I didn't know about that until a year ago, and I've been drawing for 20. So you can spend a lot of time not understanding what's wrong with your work. But there are certain things that you can understand, like a lack of fundamentals or a weak understanding of anatomy. Those things are much easier to tackle, and the more abstract things can come later on in life. Because honestly, it takes a while to learn how to learn, and it takes a while to understand and relearn how you personally need to process information in order for it to stick. Because we go through school classically thinking there's only one very specific way to learn, or the fact that we think that we just are incapable of learning. It's more so that you probably have never had something explained to you in a way that makes sense, or you just have a very particular way that would be more helpful for you to learn through, and it's not a very common way that people teach. So all those things are personal things you have to discover on your own. And again, for me, it took me quite a long time, because not only was I technically immature, right, in terms of like my technique, my fundamentals were not strong. I was also like just immature overall. Like I was too young to value fundamentals more. And that prevented me from really seeing what was wrong with my own art, because I get that it was not right, and I could understand there was something missing, and I could understand that I wanted it to be different, but I also didn't value art in the way that I needed to in order to see what was actually wrong with my work, or at least what I wanted to change. So there's time involved, there's experience involved, there's learning how to learn that's involved. And the way that I described when it comes to comparing, contrasting, using that as a way to like teach yourself the kind of very clear cut, like, here's the note, like, here's the study, here are the notes that come after the study, here's me applying those notes, here's me trying to apply those notes after a little bit of time, and then here's me figuring out which parts I forgot and which parts I didn't. Like, that's a very, like, step-by-step thing to say to someone about how to learn. But that's because it's the easiest way to distill this idea of, like, until you know for a fact what's missing, you need proof. I've always found that I needed proof of something that was missing. What helped me was comparing, contrasting my work with people that I knew were doing it well, but I couldn't tell why. As soon as I became more in tune with this idea, looking for subtlety, looking for ways in which they were accomplishing things that I didn't understand you could do, how they were accomplishing things that I just kind of dismissed as being unimportant, because it's usually the simpler things that are the most complex to do, right? Until I could see that physically by comparing, contrasting things, until I could see physically that when I was doing studies, I wasn't actually doing them with a purpose. I was doing them because everyone talks about doing studies, and that's what you should do as a student, but I hated doing studies. So I would do them because someone told me to, but then I wouldn't learn anything from them, and I'm like, why didn't it work? Why am I still bad at this? It's because I wasn't really trying to learn anything. And that's the whole point of what I'm trying to describe. It's the idea of putting purpose into everything about the process of learning, so that in a way you can start to understand why what like, if it works, if it wouldn't work, like, and also what parts of your process, of your current way of learning, has fallen apart. If there's a moment in which you kind of disconnect and disengage from the process of learning, and that stops you from, like, really following through on it. How do you stay motivated enough to do that? Because I feel, especially when my ADHD doesn't see progress, it puts me off from actually improving. Okay, here's the thing. I can't speak to people with ADHD because I don't think I have ADHD. And ADHD is a very particular way of processing information that I don't think I can actually give you advice on that, right? I think it'd be irresponsible of me to try to give you advice on that. But motivation for me has always been about trying to keep a handle on the things that I actually want to be doing with my art, right? And that's why when I talk about studies, I always tell people, try to make your studies part of what you want to be doing anyway, right? Try to be making art that you actually want to be drawing. Try to be, working towards that project. You can do studies and still be drawing your own OCs. You can be making fan art and learning things still. Like, you don't have to be doing studies that are boring, because trust me, studies are boring. I don't like doing them for a reason. Learning can be boring, or you can give it meaning by applying it and giving it purpose in a different way. And so I can't speak to how you, as someone with ADHD, can approach that, but at least for me, my studies have always been something I've incorporated into just drawing in general. I love drawing my own characters, I love drawing my own thing, right? And so for me, doing portrait studies sucks, but I'm okay learning structure if I'm also drawing a character I'm designing a costume for. And that's how I create kind of this, like, side sense of fun and interest, because I'm invested in drawing my characters. I'm not invested in learning how to, like, turn a tunic in space, right? So, again, can't speak to that stuff. I'm sure there's plenty of artists who do have ADHD who probably have much better productivity focus related things to say, but at least for me, if anything else, just would like to impress upon people that, like, learning to learn is a major part of your development, a major part of what you should be trying to understand as you mature as an artist. And on top of that, right, I think it's really important to understand that your process and your journey to learning things does not have to be grueling, it does not have to be upsetting, it does not have to be boring. So many artists think that the grind is necessary so that they can go and do the fun stuff later. So you grind for 60 years and then you just decide that I can start enjoying life now and start enjoying art now that I've done my due diligence. Like, no. You can enjoy what you're doing today, right now, even if, you know, there are times where you do kind of have to do stuff that's a little bit more boring and a little bit less fun. Like, the more that you can make learning an integrated part of your just day-to-day, like, life, the more that you can make the act of learning an active part of what comes easy to you, right? I think the easier it will be for people to see that learning is ultimately not a separate issue. You're constantly learning when you're drawing, and you don't need to separate work and learning from the things that actually got you into art in the first place. I don't think it's necessary to do that. I would hope that people are able to kind of re-inform and kind of affirm the reasons why they got into art, because that's what I'm trying to do more often now. I got into art because I love drawing my own characters. That's how I got into art when I was 2. That's what I'm doing today at 24, I think is how old I am. Like, I want to be making this kind of stuff because that's what I've always found fascinating and fun and interesting. And I don't make art because I want a job. And I don't make art because I'm trying to, like, work on a game or do any of this stuff. Like, I'm making art because I like drawing my own characters. It's the whole reason why I'm doing this. So, for me, learning and doing it in a way that prevents me from doing that feels very non-intuitive. And it wasn't until, like, a year or 2 ago that I realized how convoluted we've made learning into, how convoluted this whole process is. And this is all just to say that it is an incredibly loose place to be in, this idea of being a student of learning and stuff, but you don't have to treat it like this kind of like insurmountable wall that you have to overcome, right? I think learning can be an incredibly enriching experience, but there are parts of it that do kind of lead to, like, grit your teeth and get through it kind of moments. And in any way that you can kind of make learning a lot more clear, a lot easier for you, in any way, like, again, incorporating it into things that you already do in the first place, or finding a schedule that helps you keep on track if that's what you need, or joining one of those, like, hardcore grind groups that really keeps you to, like, a promise and you're a bunch of students learning together. If that helps you, right? But again, it's like catering your education to yourself. And, like, the last thing I want to do to anyone else is to give them the tip or trick that convinces them, like, okay, well, they did that, so I should do that, right? If you don't want to do what I said, you don't have to. I'd rather you don't if you don't want to. But I think if you at least try to start the journey of learning how you need to learn, then it'll be a lot easier in the future when you have to do a bunch more stuff, like learning on the job, or even learning new skills when it comes to art, learning beyond drawing characters or whatnot. This stuff is pretty fluid. You don't have to follow my words just because I said them. But, you know, as I always say, somewhere in that was helpful, and then everything else was just fluff. But yeah, I'll probably end stream pretty soon because it's like almost 11. And I'd like to hang out with Peach and Gary before we have to go to sleep. But yeah. Let's see. Let me see if I missed any other things. Yeah, sorry to the raid. I wasn't drawing after this because I got caught up with responding. But yeah. Hopefully that was helpful in some way. Sorry. Unfortunately, since I don't have ADHD, it's really hard for me to give advice to people who do. But hopefully some part of that was somewhat helpful. Or, you know, you can always just disregard what I said. I don't really mind. So we streamed today, and I think I will be streaming on Monday. If not Monday, I might switch to if it's not like a Tuesday, Thursday, or, well, I'd like it to be Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So I'm gonna try to stick with streaming on Monday. I'll let you all know on the Discord if that happens. Obviously, you can always check here as well. But yeah, so Saturday? September. I meant to say September, but then Saturday came to mind. If everything goes well next week, which you'll probably hear about on Monday, then, or rather, I guess Friday will be the confirmation that everything's chill. Because I have to send out a bunch of stuff on Tuesday. But we'll probably be streaming on Monday and Wednesday next week so that we can kickstart the process of potentially moving towards partner, just for funsies, because I don't think I'm going to have another break like this in a while. And I'm incapable of taking a break. So, no variables, thank you for the Twitch Prime sub, and I'm sorry you just got here. Yeah, so, yeah, I might do some 14 streams, I don't know. We'll see. But I will try to stream on Monday. So if you guys want to come by and hang out, feel free to do that. Mega Mario, yes, absolutely. Yes. I think you should feel free to do whatever you want in your sketchbook. And the idea that sketchbooks are something that we always share is weird, right? You don't have to share your sketchbook if you don't want to. And in fact, have a sketchbook that you don't share, ever. It'll be much better for you, I think, in the long run. But yeah, thank you everyone so much for coming by. Thank you for hanging out with me. Thank you for asking questions. Thank you for being patient as I try to get my life together. Hey, when a sketchbook tour releases on YouTube, you'll know that I've transcended into adulthood, okay? That's the real sign that I've gotten my shit together. But yeah, thank you so much, everyone. Love you all very much. Thank you for hanging out with me. And hopefully I'll get to see you guys on Monday. If not, I will also be streaming Wednesday and Friday, hopefully. So, hope to see you guys then. And yeah, I'll talk to you all next time.